if you're not going to do that, and we haven't done it, you don't get, it's not like, going to a Chinese restaurant. You don't get to like pick the items off the menu of the criminal justice system that you like and ignore the other ones. If we're going to be in a criminal justice system paradigm, you are entitled to Miranda warnings. When Holder testified last week, Lindsey Graham asked him, essentially, if we capture Osama bin Laden, don't you have to Mirandize him because it'll be custodial interrogation? Graham was right about that, but I would suggest to you that the situation is even worse for the government than it appears on the surface. Bin Laden, like KSM, has been under indictment by the Justice Department. Bin Laden's indictment since June 1998, which is before the embassy bombings, before the Cole, before 9/11, so we can see how adding counts to the indictment has really deterred him very well. But the point is that under American law, once you're under indictment, formal criminal proceedings have begun. You are an accused. You get Sixth Amendment rights. You get a right to counsel. They can't question you without your lawyer there. Now, that's not an issue if he's an enemy combatant. But if we're going to impose the paradigms of the criminal justice system or the protocols of the criminal justice system, that's the law.
This movement of the trial to New York by Holder, I do believe it's on purpose so that they can achieve all these other issues that you've just mentioned. You had said that it's possibly a impeachable move, that we could ask for his impeachment. And I'd like to ask you to describe to the group here if you feel that that could take hold, what would be the options for success or the percentage for success?
Well, Speaker Gingrich said that yesterday in his speech. I don't think I've said or written that anyplace. I think it's something that needs to be looked into. We actually did a lot of talking about this even last night about what the history is of impeachment proceedings for lesser executive branch officials than the President and the Vice President. It's an interesting question. I think it's worth taking a look at, but I think the ball right in front of us right now is to try to do what we can do to reverse this decision and get it back to the military court. I think there's much more of a straight legal line to doing that than there is to get into something else, which for the moment, let's face it, there's not going to be political support for either. I'll just quickly say, the U.S. Constitution makes Congress the master of the court's jurisdiction. In 2006 or 2005, we had these two pieces of legislation, the Detainee Treatment Act and the Military Commissions Act, which defined as a matter of law what an enemy combatant is for purposes of using military proceedings. I don't see any reason why Congress couldn't enact a law that says if you fit the definition of enemy combatant in the Military Commissions Act, the federal civilian courts do not have jurisdiction over you, and all proceedings need to be in the military courts. And to me, that's a much more promising route. It's a much more promising route than, I've heard some of this other stuff about, why don't we deny funding for, him flying them from Gitmo to New York? The executive branch doesn't work dollar for dollar. If they want to get him here, they're going to get him here. But if Congress says the courts have no jurisdiction, then they can't hear the case. There
are tens of thousands of KSMs waiting in the wings for their moment of glory. For the first time in our history, we have had a Marxist-Stalinist takeover of our schools from K through the PhD, and now the White House. So I ask myself, what opportunity might there be in this atrocious decision for a civil trial? I've asked myself, in what way could it backfire, causing the most damage to Obama while the least damage to people we care about? Now, I've lived in Manhattan most of my life, so I have skin in this game. You don't need to skin me. It occurs to me that the best outcome for the values we cherish might be an acquittal. That would so disgrace Obama in the minds of at least 80% of the American public that it could torpedo that movement for the foreseeable future. What do you think of that?
I don't know. Steve and Bob probably have ideas about this too. I think that by the time this trial happens and the acquittal you talk about happen, Obama would be well into his second term. So, the upside of that is questionable.
I think all of the efforts that would go into a trial, a KSM trial, in which he is going to have a microphone to basically promote his agenda and to basically sprout his radical theology and his attacks on the United States, and to serve as a microphone for Al-Qaeda. That alone, in and of itself, should be enough to defeat Obama. But that's not going to be enough. And I think you're right. I think it's going to take a reversal of major counts in which it ultimately may result in an acquittal that would construe such a major reversal of U.S. interests, such a major damaging of U.S. interests, that that Obama's political theology that is endemic now within Congress would be so much discredited that it would not be enacted again.
If I'm ever on trial, I want my full constitutional rights. I mean, if I'm caught with Bob Spencer's book or something like that. And one worry I would have in bringing KSM to New York and according him the full rights of an American citizen, and then the hue and cry of, well, no, we couldn't possibly imagine this fellow being acquitted. Would there not possibly be some danger of watering down the constitutional protections that American citizens enjoy in order to make sure we get this guy? Okay. But then we've watered down our own constitutional protections.
The answer is yes. By having all this done in the civilian criminal justice system, the rules that you make in terrorism cases end up applying to all the cases across the board, so that if you have to water down the rules to get a terrorism case done, you create precedents that really water down the rights of American citizens, which is what those rights are intended for.
If there's ever an example of hate speech, it's certainly what the imams are saying in some of these places, not only around the world, but here in the United States. Why has that never been prosecuted under the law that, Andy, you said, something that you did with the blind sheikh, with this sedition law? I mean, it seems to me that that's a classic example of it.
Well, the laws were fashioned by people who support those imams, and they were fashioned in order to prosecute not those imams, but the people who report on them. I mean, it's really bitterly ironic when you look, for example, at Geert Wilders' Fitna. There is the quoting, if you haven't seen it, please do see it. It's available on the internet in many places. He quotes the Quran and then shows Islamic imams quoting the Quran and Muslims committing acts of violence in accord with those dictates of the Quran. Very straightforward. And so it's not the imams who are on trial for hate speech, it's Wilders. But all he did was depict the imams doing what they do. And so it's clear that there's a tremendous inconsistency here, but I think that it would be dangerous if we were to start trying to take advantage of those laws and use them against them. In the first place, there are safeguards in various places to prevent that from happening. One is, for example, in the UK, when they were talking about instituting laws against religious hatred, inciting religious hatred, the Muslim Council of Britain asked for and received a specific exemption for the Quran, because by these kinds of standards, the Quran is full of hate speech. But it's exempt from hate speech prosecutions specifically. And so, but I think that it would be a bad idea to start using these laws, because then we're acquiescing to the restriction of freedom of speech. And that opens the door to tyranny in other ways.
I think that if it leads to violence, it's like yelling fire in a crowded theater. But if it doesn't lead to violence, unfortunately, if it just infuses the Islamic population, the constituency, with this notion that cultural jihad is acceptable, it's incumbent upon the media, the fourth estate, to report this. And this is the biggest dereliction of responsibility I've seen in our society. The failure of the media to report about the radicalism within the mosques in the United States. It's incumbent upon them. They have no problem reporting about neo-Nazi groups. They have no problem reporting about evangelical Christianity. They have no problem reporting about other radicalism. But when it comes to reporting about radicalism within the Islamic community, the silence is deafening. And it's a political correctness imposed upon the political dictates at the New York Times, at the Washington Post, at NBC News, at the mainstream media, not to criticize radical Islam and not to report on the imams that espouse radical speech, which I think, unfortunately, leaves us with the worst situation possible, where the government can't act and shouldn't necessarily act, and the fourth estate, which is designed to basically serve as the fourth branch of government, doesn't act because of its political correctness, so that the imams get away with the literary equivalent of murder. And that's what they've been doing for the last 25 years.
Yes, we've all seen how Glenn Beck was so successful in having Van Jones, removed from the administration. With Fox being such a courageous truth teller to the American people, I mean, we're all here, we're hearing it, and we're going to go out and tell as many people as we can. But would you think that a panel like this on Glenn Beck, he had a health care panel on his show for an hour and devoted an hour to it. Do you think, and I'll ask the audience and the panel, do you think Glenn Beck or Hannity would be an effective panel for the American people to hear more of this?
To talk about what exactly?
All what we're talking about today.
Because I'll tell you straight out, Glenn Beck and Hannity have been nowhere on the issue of the motives and goals of the jihadis. They have no interest in talking about this. They're just as cowed as the outlets that Steve just mentioned in terms of covering up for what's really going on.
Even Glenn Beck?
Glenn Beck and Hannity. Look, Glenn Beck's book, An Inconvenient Book, he says, I've read the whole Quran, and I can testify personally that Islam is a religion of peace. I think he must have read it with his eyes closed.
Wow.
But that's what he says, and he has never discussed this issue. They sometimes will feature issues of terrorism, but skirt around the ideology. And the problem is that, it's been a very successful campaign of intimidation by the Council on American Islamic Relations over years, and it's not just the leftist media or the mainstream media that has been affected by it, that they're afraid that they will be tarred as bigots, as racists, as Islamophobes. The exact same thing that happened with Major Hassan and all the people who heard all the things he was saying and they were afraid to speak up. The reality is, though, that if we do not speak about this ideology, if we don't speak about where it comes from, then we will never be able to formulate any coherent way to deal with it. But Beck and Hannity have been absolutely AWOL on this, and I don't think we need to be keeping on apologizing for them or running interference for them. They're very good on other issues, but as far as this goes, they're the New York Times.
Let me just respectfully dissent a little bit from my friend Bob. I was on Hannity's show about 2 weeks ago. I was encouraged to make the point that it was Islamic ideology that fuels Islamic terror. When I made the point, he asked me to repeat it again for emphasis, and I've been asked to come back in about a week or so to do a program about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and radical Islamic ideology. So I agree with Bob that this has been a general problem in the media, but I do think there are people who are coming around, and that was not my experience with Sean.
Steve, do you have a final comment?
Actually, my final comment is just to congratulate everybody who came here, and to congratulate David Horowitz for operating such a wonderful organization.
And a quick exclamation point. Andy had passed a note saying, remember that twice as many were killed at Fort Hood than in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So if you need a talking point about this is terrorism, that is an easy and very understandable concept to convey. I want to thank again this panel for their brilliance, their courage, for being on the front lines.
Thank you.